Hello again, fellow Mystery Files. Today I have an interesting video, I hope anyway. It is part one of two of revealing what my initial thoughts were on Christie novels. What did I think the solutions were as I was reading these books? Now, full disclosure, this is what my recollection of my first reads were, and has been over 20 years now for some of them, so my memory might be a little fuzzy. Also, I did not read the Christie books in order, and that would probably play a role in which books I was able to solve and which I couldn't. I know I read And Then There Were None first. Then I read the Poirots in random order. Then I read the Marples in random order. Then I read Tommy and Tuppence in publication order, and then the standalones in random order. And this was also because, before I became a true expert on mystery novels, nowadays I like to brag that I can solve about 90% of mysteries on a first read, using meta clues. But at this point in time, I had not picked up on a lot of that, and I didn't have the experience of reading hundreds and hundreds of mysteries. Now, there will be spoilers ahead, so you can use the chapter titles to avoid spoilers. And before I begin, make sure you join in the Discord channel to join a community of fellow mystery lovers. Link in the description, and make sure you like and subscribe to keep up to date with the channel. I will go in chronological publication order, starting with The Mysterious Affair at Styles, and this one I distinctly remembered I was spoiled on, and that's the thing with Christie, is that I was so into her works that I couldn't help myself, reading up on her and her books and her characters, that on occasion I got spoiled on certain elements of certain books. Now, in this case, I distinctly remember the name Evelyn Howard being mentioned in Dumb Witness, which is, I suppose, the one I read right before this book. So I knew it was Evie Howard. Now, I didn't know it was Alfred as well, and I never really considered the possibility because I knew it was Evie already, so I didn't think to look for another suspect. And I feel like if I wasn't spoiled, I probably would have guessed Alfred and not Evie, but alas, I'll never know. Onto the Secret Adversary, and there are only really two options on who Mr. Brown could be, either Julius Hersheimer or Sir James Peel Edgerton, and naturally I was wrong, I picked Julius. The reason was that I just didn't believe Julius wanted to marry his long-lost cousin Jane Finn. That seemed very suspicious to me. And now that I know it was Sir James, it does make a lot of sense, especially the circumstances regarding Mrs. Vandermeyer's murder. But at the time, I just found Julius to be such an untrustworthy character. And of course now I know the meta clue, Christie would use British characters as murderers, and Julius was American. But I didn't really think of that at the time. Next up is Murder on the Links, and I also got this one wrong. I thought it was Gabriel Stoner, who was Renault's secretary. Even this early on, I was suspicious of the secretary character, the person in charge of the operations and the person, in position to know everything. And I really thought the whole backstory with Madame and Martha Dubray was a red herring. And I suppose it is partly a red herring, but I thought it was just an entire red herring, and that the real murderer would come from within the house. But again, this is Christie, so I should have assumed nothing. Up next is The Man in the Brown Suit, which I believe is the very last Christie novel I read for the first time. It's either this one or Why Didn't They Ask Evans? And I got this one wrong too. I thought it was Guy Paget. Again, I picked the secretary character. And admittedly, I did think it was a bit too obvious to be Paget, but since this was more of a thriller, I thought such a thing was possible. I obviously knew it wasn't Colonel Race since, I had read him in other novels, and Sir Eustace really didn't register on my radar. It's not I thought it couldn't be him, but I didn't really consider him a viable suspect. Then we have The Secret of Chimneys, and again, I have no idea what I thought was going on here. I don't even really remember my first read of this book. I know I was reading it in class when I was supposed to be paying attention to the lesson, and quite frankly, I'd rather have been doing the lesson than reading this book. But I just really have no memorable opinions about this book at the time I read it, and even now, I remember just slogging through it, just not even that interested in this book. And you know how much I don't like this book. I've talked about it pretty much every opportunity I have. But again, this is definitely one I know the least, definitely one I remember the least. I honestly couldn't tell you what I was thinking at the time. And then we have a big one here in The Murder of Roger Ackroyd. Now, I was spoiled on the fact that Christie had a novel where the narrator was the murderer, but I didn't know which book that was. So when I was reading this one, that was in the back of my head. So I did suspect Dr. Shepard, but I didn't really think it was him. I remember not having any clue really as to who done it. I was probably like equally suspicious of many characters and not being able to lock onto anyone specific. I remember at different times heavily suspecting Flora and Major Blunt, but I was never able to like land on a specific character before the solution was revealed. And again, it was in my head that it could be Dr. Shepard, that I shouldn't eliminate him, but again, I didn't really consider him here. And now we have a weird one in the Big Four, which, I mean, this isn't really a mystery per se, so I didn't really know what I was supposed to be looking for here or trying to solve. Again, this isn't really that kind of novel, so I was never, like, thinking about a solution here of any kind. I mean, I was right away when that man dies in Poirot's flat, but then after that, I just sort of forgotten about. So, again, I wasn't really thinking of a solution on this one. The Mystery of the Blue Train, and finally we have one I did solve. I did pick up on the clue from Lady Tamplin when she says there was a jewel robbery when she was a nurse in Switzerland and that Knighton had been in Switzerland, but for the life of me, I just like couldn't figure out how Knighton actually pulled it off. And that's a case with a lot of these where I can figure out who but not anything else, and I was very baffled by this, but I knew it had to be Knighton. I did pick Knighton, and I did not pick up on Ada Mason slash Kitty Kid, whatever her name is, being involved as well. And that's a lot of my problems when solving these, is that I rarely actually consider the possibility of an accomplice when I know I probably should. And I also often don't try to actually solve the mechanics. I just try to figure out who. So I was able to get Knight in here, but quite frankly, not much else. Now we have the Seven Dials mystery, which I read before The Secret of Chimneys, so that was probably not ideal. It's also why I thought it was Bill Eversley. Had I known he was in Secret of Chimneys, I probably would have solved this correctly. I just thought Bill was seemingly, knew everything and was everywhere important, and he seemed to be like guiding Bundle along here. Of course, this was a different reason for that, but I actually did pick up on and ignored a lot of the clues here. Like, I did find Jimmy's story about finding the burglar at Wyvern Abbey to be completely phony. I even said to myself, well, that's definitely a lie. But again, I also did not pick up on what the implication of that would be. And I also thought it was, oh boy, that's awfully convenient that Lorraine just happened to be where that packet of papers fell. But again, I just never made the connection because I was pretty convinced it was Bill Eversley. And now we have our first Miss Marple in Murder at the Vicarage. This was not the first Miss Marple I read, but it was the first one I solved. I did guess it was Lawrence Redding and Anne Protheroe. I recognized a lot of similarities between this book and The Mysterious Affair at Styles, so I was able to peg the solution hinged on similar but not exact dynamics. I also think what helped was there being just a lot of like very clear red herrings going on in this novel that eliminated pretty much everyone else. Now, I didn't pick up on a lot of the clues regarding the rock Lawrence gave Miss Marple or Anne not having her handbag with her, but I did see the dynamics at play, and you know what? It didn't at all hamper the quality of this book. And that's the weird thing. Like, sometimes a book I easily solve, it ruins the novel. Like, it's no point in reading on. And other times, being easily solved, or getting the solution early on, it actually improves the novel. Like, you feel a lot of fun and enjoyment from solving the novel and then watching your theories play out and being correct. You never know what's going to happen there. Then we have the Sittaford Mystery, and I did not get this at all. There were way too many things going on and characters in play for me to even really develop a theory. Now, I immediately pegged it that it had to be someone at the table tapping because there was just no way that was real, but I just could not formulate an educated guess here because there was just so much going on and there were too many viable suspects in play. But this is one where, to this day, I just kick myself over for not getting, because I definitely remember reading the scene where Major Burnaby receives that check for winning the football contest. I thought, oh, isn't that weird? Didn't Captain Trevelyan use his address for that? And it just, not clicking in my head, never making the connection here that Burnaby was killing Trevelyan for that check. And it's actually shocking how often, not just in this novel, but in others, where I would pick up on the correct clues and just, fail to make the actual connection, or the opposite would happen. I would find the right murderer and to fail to pick up on any of the clues leading me there. And now we have Peril at End House. And this book has the honor of being the very first Christie I was able to solve on my own. I pegged right away Nick was lying. Naturally, I missed a lot of the clues there, including the letters, and really just not having any idea of what a motive could be for her. Now, to be fair here, I was also helped a little bit by the table of contents. I believe I've mentioned this before, but in this novel, Poirot creates a list of 10 suspects and letters them A to J. But in the chapter of the murder reveal, it's called The Person K, which is a pretty big clue the person is not on that list. And the person that wasn't on the list was Nick. And I saw that chapter title in the table of contents at the beginning of the book. And, I don't count this as being spoiled since I still figured it out for myself. And I did pick up on, clues of, Nick obviously lying at points and, Freddy telling us Nick is a liar. So maybe this one has a little asterisk to it, but I give myself full credit for solving this one. On to Lord Edgware Dies, and I have to be honest, I think this was the easiest Poirot novel to solve. It is a very good novel, but I just, never understood the, praise this novel gets for its mystery mechanics. I instantly pegged this one pretty much before the murder even happened. I never for 1 second doubted Carlotta went to the house party and Jane went to kill Lord Edgware. It's just insane to me that Japp and Poirot really believe Jane went to the party and Carlotta went to kill Lord Edgware. I don't understand why they never considered the opposite. It was fairly, glowingly obvious to me. And I knew I was absolutely right on this one. To me, this one was very easy to solve. I didn't consider any other possibilities. This might be the easiest Christie novel to solve. Maybe a certain Miss Marple novel we'll talk about in the next video is easier to solve. But I really had no problem solving this one. We have Murder on the Orient Express next, and I was, of course, spoiled on this one since I had watched the Albert Finney film before I read the novel. And to be honest, I wasn't really trying to solve the film as I watched it. Now, I would like to think I could have solved this one had it not been spoiled on it, but in all likelihood, I probably would have noticed something weird all these people knew Daisy Armstrong, and then just not made that connection that they were all in on it. I probably would have tried to narrow it down to one or two people, probably Colonel Arbuthnot. But also, when I read the novels after I had seen the films, it's always in the back of my head, oh, maybe the film had a different solution. Again, that's not the case here, and that's not really the case for any of these, but it was something I was consciously thinking about at the time. Next up is Why Didn't They Ask Evans, potentially the last Christie I read for the first time. And this was another one where I was partially correct. I did suspect Moira when Moira kept talking about how terrible her husband was, because I've seen that obfuscation from Christie a lot. She'll have a character say so-and-so is a bad person when they aren't. So I did pick up on that. I think reading this one last or second to last definitely helped me solve that. I didn't really pick up on Roger Bassington French. I think it's a bit weird because I think most people probably would pick up on Roger and not Moira. I was suspicious of him, but I didn't really think Moira was working alone. But I more lean toward Dr. Nicholson, actually, of this being a case of two people pretending to hate each other, but they were actually working together. I didn't come close to solving who Evans was. I highly doubt anyone did. Let me know in the comments if you solved who Evans was. Let me know. I doubt anyone did. I won't believe you anyway. Three-act tragedy, and this is one I did not solve, and I feel like that's because this was one of the very first Poirots I read that I was not spoiled on. My instinct is that I would have solved this one had I read it later on. I thought it was Oliver Manders. He was portrayed as a bad guy, and me being naive just thought oh, it would be him. I also had it in my head that it was him because his name sounded like Oliver Mellers, who is the titular Lady Chatterley's lover, and that was supposed to be some kind of clue. But I'm definitely misremembering this. There is no way I read Lady Chatterley's lover at such a young age. Certainly not before I read Three-Act Tragedy. Again, that's definitely some Mandela effect having on my brain here. But the reason why I think I could have solved this is because I distinctly remember thinking that it would be weird for Christie to tell us all about Sir Charles's background, about his real name if it wasn't important, but I just fell into the trap that Reverend Babington was the initial target and Manders was the only one who would have killed him. I was not thinking like outside the box at this point. Death in the Clouds. Again, one I read very early on. This is actually a bit of a streak here of ones I read early on. And I just completely fell into Christie's trap. I was so focused on who could have shot the dart into Madame Giselle that I wasn't really paying attention to anything else. I was leaning toward the father and son archaeologist duo as they had like pipes or something. And I do remember by this time I probably was sharp enough to avoid picking the most obvious person in Lady Horbury. I had been burned by, picking the most obvious person before. I also thought the entire search for Madame Giselle's daughter was a huge red herring. And I actually thought the archaeologists had like accidentally killed Madame Giselle because they had dug up this pipe that they didn't know had a poison dart in it, which would have been funny, but again, not to be. The ABC murders, another one I read very early on, and I did not have a clue as to what was going on here. I did initially fall into the trap that it was Alexander Bonaparte Cust, but about halfway through, I realized, no, that's just too obvious. Like, Christie wouldn't do that. But because I read this so early on, I didn't know if Christie would write like an inverted mystery, or not technically not an inverted mystery, but like a serial killer novel without some underlying puzzle. But I did start thinking Cuss was just too obvious, but I did not have any clue as to who at all. And to be honest, I was suspecting one of like the police officers just because they were always present and the other suspects weren't really. This was also my first novel with either Hastings or Japp in it, and I did know Christie had a book where the narrator was a murderer, so Hastings was at least on my radar, but I did know Hastings and Japp were recurring characters, so I didn't suspect them, but again, it was in my head at least. Murder in Mesopotamia. Again, this is another very early one for me, and this was the first book I read with a first-person narrator, so I was suspicious of Amy Leatherin, but I didn't really think it was her. I was leaning toward more Miss Johnson for a while until she was murdered, and then I switched to Father Lavingy. I did sort of pick up maybe he wasn't a real priest, like fake priest, or a very common trope in mysteries, so I had seen that sort of thing on like TVs and movies before, but I never really considered Eric Linder. I mean, this is way before I would have like hooked on to like the wife or husband, the obvious suspect, even though I had seen that before in other Christie novels, despite this one being a very early one for me. And I really just had like no idea how the murder occurred. I remember like staring at the map in the book and just like being completely baffled at the mechanics here. Cards on the table, and I did solve this one, although to be fair, by the end of the novel there's just two living suspects, so you had a 50-50 chance, but I did peg Dr. Roberts pretty early on, not for any specific reasoning, he was just sort of like my vibes pick. I didn't pick up on any of the clues, and again, not knowing anything about bridge, and they weren't very helpful anyway, but it just seemed like it would be Dr. Roberts because he was a suspect sort of most featured, and especially by the end when he comes rushing in with that letter from Mrs. Lorimer, I was pretty confident it was him. Next up is Dumb Witness, and this is a bit of a weird one for me, and I'm also going to minorly, but not outright, spoil After the Funeral. I know Dumb Witness was published before After the Funeral, but I read it after. And these two books have very similar setups, very similar dynamics at play, and I recognized that, and I thought to myself that Christie wouldn't use like the same like equivalent character as the murderer here, so I eliminated that person. And I also noticed like Jacob Tanios was in the mold of characters who we are primed not to like, but wouldn't be the actual killer. And then I did settle on Bella, but I just like couldn't get out of my head that Christie wouldn't have used a mother of small children as a killer, but I just kept coming back to her, and I was right. Now, again, I missed all of the clues there, the brooch in the mirror, Bella's real name being Arabella, all of that, but I did land on the correct person, and I never suspected Bob. That definitely seemed like something Christie would not do. Now we have Death on the Nile, and again, I was spoiled here. I had seen the Ustinov film, but again, it was always in my mind that maybe the film changed the murderers, but it didn't. And I feel fairly confident that I never would have guessed this correctly had I not known. No chance at all. This was also the first Poirot novel I read, so again, very unlikely I could have solved this anyway, since it was my first. And I did specifically pick this first because I knew I had seen the film. And even watching the film, like I just remember having like absolutely no idea what the solution could be at all. And this was one of Christie's more involved mechanics and probably like her hardest one to solve, at least using the clues in the novel. Appointment with Death, and this is again one of the ones where I picked up on a bunch of clues but like totally missed the plot. I did notice Mrs. Boynton saying that she never forgets a face was a very strange response to what Sarah King had said, and I was sort of getting the feeling it probably wasn't member of the Boynton family who killed her, just because that was a little obvious, but I never landed on Lady Westholme. I think I was probably blinded by the fact that she was an MP and that Christie wouldn't do that. Again, I was wrong. I probably was thinking more along the lines of like Jefferson Cope, again, in that position of someone who should know everything and like would know how like the family does things and things like that. But again, was wrong. Hercule Poirot's Christmas, and I solved this one. This is the Christie novel I probably most thoroughly solved. Again, maybe that same certain Miss Marple novel beats it, but that's probably contributing factors to why this is my personal favorite Christie. I pretty much instantly pegged Superintendent Sugden. Now, this is one of the last Poirots I read, I believe, so I was definitely like more attuned to looking for certain things, but I immediately picked up on the fact that Sugden's description of his alleged visit to Simeon Lee, well, we did not see on the page, we only heard about it from him, and it seemed like the kind of story that was just obviously false. And once I was looking at him, I started noticing all the people like confusing him with Harry and with Stephen Farr, and I did peg, oh, this is another son of Simeon Lee, and Pilar saying like Sugden looked like her grandfather, and then we have never mentioned the peg and the rubber until Poirot brought it up after Magdalena did. And I fully solved this one for the most part. Now I didn't pick up like the Pilar situation, and I didn't really understand where the diamonds fit in, but again, I solved this, and I solved this pretty good. We have Murder is Easy next, and this is a bit of a weird one too because I don't remember at all what I was thinking the first time I read this. I almost certainly didn't get it, and I suspect I wasn't really trying to solve it too hard. I really just don't remember the details of my first read. I probably should have known it was Miss Wainfleet. She's definitely in the mold of a Christie killer. Christie loved her elderly spinster murderers, as do I, but I just like don't recall at all on this one. And then there were none. Again, I was spoiled on this one because I had seen the film, two films actually, the 65 and 74 films, and boy was I surprised when I actually read the novel that this book wasn't set in the Alps. Again, it was at the back of my head that maybe the book had a different ending than the films, which it did, but the murderer was the same, and I was not fooled by the name changes either. And I really do wish I had read the book first because I would have loved to see if I could have solved this, which, again, highly doubt I could have. This book was assigned reading in my 8th grade English class, and none of the other students were able to solve it, so I probably doubt I could have. But I also wish, I didn't tell my class I had already read the book, so I could have been like this, like, savant predicting the book 100%. Missed opportunity there for sure. Sad Cypress, and this one I did get the Who, but not anything else. Now, I was a bit baffled by the actual mechanics here, but again, this is just an error Christie made that I've talked about before. The fact that the murder plot didn't really make sense for Nurse Hopkins was giving me some hesitation, but I found the prick on her wrist just to be a dead giveaway, and also that she was flushed when Eleanor walked in the kitchen, a bit obvious. Again, I didn't connect what any of that actually meant, but I knew it had to mean something. And I've talked about this book before, just having like a lot of good clues sort of obviously laid in there. And again, the mechanics not being that great. And I actually found this one pretty easy to solve, although I did not get that Nurse Hopkins was Mary's aunt. I doubt anyone really could have. And again, it was the mechanics of this murder were giving me some hesitation here. Again, couldn't quite figure out like how Nurse Hopkins did it, and like especially when like she was poisoning herself or whatever. But again, I did not get that at all. One to buckle my shoe, and yet again one I was on the right track and did not solve. Now, I remember on this one just not being able to come to an educated guess. I was sort of thinking it could be Alistair Blunt, since he was the center of things, but again, I did wonder if Christie would have used like such an important person like him as a murderer. Of all the books I read up until this point, I had not really had a thriller, like a true thriller like this one. This was sort of half and half, but so I didn't really know how she would handle a thriller. So I was sort of flying blind here a little bit, and it did give me some hesitation with him. Next up is Evil Under the Sun, and I also had seen the Ustinov film before I read this novel, so I was spoiled, and I do not recommend watching the films first, by the way. Read the books first, but at least in this film, like, I did sort of suspect Patrick and Christine, and maybe that was more so from, like, the editing of the film than the actual clues and the plot going on, so I really can't give myself credit for this one, but I do sort of think I would have gotten this one. It does feel sort of like a textbook case of like people deliberately giving the wrong impression of what's going on, and that is the case here with the Red Ferns misleading us about who Arlena is. N or M, and I didn't really have a clue what was going on here. I did not get this one, and I didn't have a clue. I mean, to be fair, this is a thriller, so less to go on. But Christie kind of just gives you Commander Haydock earlier on in the novel, but I did not get Mrs. Sprott. And to be honest, I did not find it weird or odd at all to, at least teenage me didn't, that a mother would shoot the person holding her baby. Like, I did not find that strange or unusual in the least bit. I didn't really buy into like the Mrs. Perenna red herring, and that would have also eliminated her daughter. And once Commander Haydock is revealed as N, all of the men are innocent, so the female field is what's left. And to be honest, that is very limited since you can eliminate like the Perennas and probably like Mrs. Kaylee since her husband is there. It leaves very few suspects, but I still didn't get it at all. The Body in the Library, and I did get this one, but I would be lying if I said it was for any reason outside of vibes. I figured it was either Mark or Adelaide, and since the victim was strangled, I figured it was Mark since he was a man, and men would be more likely to strangle. And again, I did figure out it was for Conway Jefferson's money. I did not get Josephine as an accomplice either, nor did I pick up on the body swap. Like, I knew the girl guide obviously was like figuring into it somehow, but I just couldn't get there, so I just basically ignored her and hoped it would sort itself out, which it did. And I just couldn't think of like why Mark would murder the girl guide. I was not ever considering a body swap, even if the clues were there for it, but again, I did get Mark at least, so I think that counts enough. Onto Five Little Pigs, and this one I was absolutely certain it was Angela. I was convinced Angela pranked Ammius's beer with what she thought was salt, but was actually the valerian or some other poison, and accidentally killed Ammius, and Caroline covered it up. I was so happy I figured this out, and I was like so confident, and it was a trap. Christie lured me pretty good on this one to thinking Angela put the conine or the valerian or something into Ammius's beer by mistake. I never suspected anyone else. I missed the clues about, wiping the bottle and like see to her packing. I did pick up on everything tastes foul today, that line, but naturally I did not discern its importance, and boy was I gobsmacked when Poirot revealed it wasn't Angela, but Elsa, who I never really considered. I mean, I thought she was a bit of an obvious choice on paper here, just because she was like, the kind of person who would do that, but like, I don't know, I never really thought she would kill Ammius. Like, if it was Caroline who died, that would make a lot more sense to me, but again, Christie got me good on this one. And finally, for this video, we have The Moving Finger, and this is another one I completely fell into the trap Christie laid. I thought it was Amy Griffith because, there was that casual mention early on about how a similar thing happened in a different town, and it was a leader of the Girl Guide troop. It was just so casually thrown in. I thought it was a real clue, but of course it was a red herring. And in retrospect, I probably should have known it was Mr. Symington, but I did fall for the trick that, like, I actually did think Mrs. Symington committed suicide, but I was always thinking it was, like, super odd that, like, Amy would have been murdered. I mean, Amy could have murdered Agnes in the Symington household. Like, boy, that was weird. So I thought it was like her brother who did it to like cover up for Amy being the poison pen writer. Because being a doctor, he would have access to other people's houses. Like, I really should have noticed it was the Symingtons and they were at the center of everything, and that Mr. Symington would have done it again. But no, of course not. I didn't get it. And that is it for this video. Let me know in the comments what some of your solution ideas the first time you were reading these novels were. It's try to stick to just the ones in this video. We'll save the other half of the canon for next week, which by the way, next week's episode is part 2 of this, where I will finish out the second half of the canon, the 33 final books of Agatha Christie and what I thought was going on in them. Until next time, Mystery Files.